The Odyssey has 7 major female characters, and every one of them has been misread. Penelope, Circe, Calypso, Nausicaä, Athena, Helen, and Klytaimnestra. 7 women, each doing something essential in the poem, each one reduced by the Western tradition, and in some cases by the scholars who should have known better, to a type. The faithful wife, the dangerous enchantress, the lonely goddess, the innocent girl, the divine helper, the legendary face, the murderous queen. Homer's portraits are not types. They are, in every case, more complicated, more intelligent, and more morally serious than what the tradition made of them. This episode is about the gap between what Homer actually wrote and what 2,500 years of reception decided those women meant. It is also about what the poem is doing structurally when it places women where it places them, which is not where you would expect and not for the reasons the tradition has assumed. The Odyssey is not primarily a poem about Odysseus finding his way home. It is a poem about whether the homecoming will succeed, and the shadow it is cast in from the very first book is the homecoming that failed. Agamemnon returns from Troy, the victorious commander of the entire Greek army, and his wife kills him. She has taken a lover in his absence, Aegisthus, and together they murder Agamemnon in his bath. Homer specifies the net thrown over him so he cannot raise his arms, the axe, the domestic setting of the crime. Zeus invokes this story in Book 1 before we have even met Odysseus. Agamemnon is the shadow narrative of the poem, what the homecoming looks like when it fails. Everything about the poem's plot from this point is shaped by this shadow. Odysseus approaches Ithaca in disguise specifically because he has absorbed the lesson of Agamemnon. Verify before acting. Observe before revealing yourself. He tests the servant women for loyalty. He tests his own son. He does not reveal himself to Penelope until she has tested him. The disguise and the patience and the extreme caution of the homecoming sequence are all, at some level, the Agamemnon lesson applied. And at the other end of this shadow, the positive against which the negative is always measured, is Penelope. Penelope is the most important character in the Odyssey who is not the title character. This is not because she is the faithful wife waiting for her husband, the tradition's reduction of her function. It is because she makes his return possible. Without Penelope's 20 years of strategic management of the suitors, there is no household to return to, no legitimate claim to defend, no Ithaca that still belongs to Odysseus in any meaningful sense. She has held the household together not through passive waiting, but through active management. The shroud stratagem, the management of the suitors' competing claims, the bow contest she announces at exactly the moment it will serve Odysseus's return. Emily Wilson, whose 2017 translation brought Penelope's agency back to the foreground, observes that Penelope is the one character in the poem who consistently outthinks everyone around her, including, in several key scenes, Odysseus himself. She is not waiting, she is governing a besieged household with the resources available to her. Klytaimnestra is what happens when the faithful wife is not faithful. Penelope is what happens when she is. And the poem turns entirely on this distinction. The shadow and the light are both female. The poem knows this. Athena is the most present divine figure in the Odyssey, more present than Zeus, more present than Poseidon, and more active in the hero's story than any other Olympian. She is also in some ways the most Odyssean character in the poem. Her intelligence is the same kind as his, practical and strategic and delighting in disguise, and she says as much when they meet in Book 13. They recognize each other as equals. The one character in the Odyssey who is a genuine peer to Odysseus in intelligence is a woman. The tradition has generally treated Athena as a divine assistant, the god who helps the hero as divine assistants do. This misses the quality of the relationship. Athena chooses Odysseus. She advocates for him in divine counsel. She takes pleasure in him, and the poem is careful to show that what she values in him is not his strength or his heroism, but his mind, the specific quality that separates him from every other hero at Troy. Circe is a different kind of helper, and her structural importance is the least recognized of any figure in the poem. She is the daughter of Helios the sun god, a goddess in her own right, and she tells Odysseus more about the dangers ahead than any other character in the poem, including the gods. She knows the sirens, she knows Scylla, she knows the cattle of the sun, and what happens if they are touched. She provides the navigational intelligence that allows the second half of the wanderings to be survived. Without Circe, Odysseus reaches the sirens without warning and dies. Without Circe, he approaches the strait between Scylla and Charybdis without knowing which to choose, and probably loses all his ships. Penelope gets the credit for keeping the household together. Circe gets almost none of the credit for making his return possible. The tradition has treated her as an erotic danger, the enchantress who must be overcome before the real story can continue. Homer treats her as the most knowledgeable and most generous informant in the wanderings, and the year on Aea as a necessary interval of recovery, not as a moral failure. As we discussed in the Circe episode, the distinction matters enormously. The two divine women who help Odysseus, one Olympian, one a goddess of lesser rank, are the most practically intelligent characters in the poem. The tradition has consistently read them as a divine helper and a dangerous temptress. Homer wrote a divine peer and a navigator. Calypso offers immortality and is refused. The sirens offer total knowledge and are resisted. Both offers are refused by the same means, not heroism, not virtue in the conventional sense, but the recognition that what is being offered is a substitute for the thing itself. Calypso's offer is genuine. She is not deceiving Odysseus about what she is giving him. She is offering eternal life with a goddess on a paradise island, and the poem is honest that this is a real offer and a real loss. Odysseus refuses it not because it is bad, but because it is not his. The poem does not make this an easy choice or a morally simple one. It simply shows us the man making it. The sirens are the most intellectually demanding temptation in the poem. They offer complete narrative knowledge, all the stories of Troy, all the suffering and glory, the total account. They are, in the most literal sense, the offer to become the audience of your own life rather than living it. Odysseus resists not because knowledge is dangerous, but because the cost of this particular knowledge is existence. You listen and you die. The mast and the wax in the ears are not moral positions, they're practical solutions to the problem of how to want something and not be able to have it. Both Calypso and the sirens are female. The tradition has made much of this, the dangerous woman as the obstacle to the male hero's return. Homer's poem does not support this reading. Calypso is generous and honest and loves Odysseus and lets him go. The sirens are supernatural and deadly. Both are structurally necessary. The poem needs to show Odysseus choosing the particular over the general, the mortal over the eternal, the life over the story of the life. Women are placed at these choice points not because women are dangerous, but because the poem needs figures of genuine power and genuine weight at the moments when the choice most needs to be felt. Nausicaä appears in one episode of the Odyssey and is never seen again. She does not appear in the homecoming, she does not appear in the underworld. She is given 11 books of silence after her farewell to Odysseus on the shore of Scheria, and that farewell is 4 lines of the poem. She is the most economically drawn, significant character in ancient literature. What Homer achieves with that economy is remarkable. In a single scene, the beach, the ball game, the emergence of Odysseus from the bushes, the speech, the walk to the city, the farewell, we understand Nausicaä completely. Her courage, her social intelligence, her breeding, the slight and entirely appropriate feeling she has for the man she has helped. Homer gives her one scene because one scene is enough. It is a masterclass in narrative economy that the tradition has consistently undervalued, preferring to read her as a stock figure, the innocent girl, rather than the complete and fully realized portrait she is. Helen is the opposite. Multiple appearances, enormous complexity, and a tradition of misreading that has made her into either a victim or a monster for 2,500 years. Homer's Helen is neither. She is a woman of extraordinary intelligence and self-possession who has lived through the catastrophe that her existence caused, has returned to Sparta, and resumed her role as queen and wife with the professional grace of someone who has decided that the only available response to having been the most consequential face in Greek history is to continue managing the consequences. The drug she pours into the wine of her grieving guests is both an act of kindness and a slight, unsettling one. She knows what grief is doing to the men around her. She has the means to address it. She uses them. Homer does not comment. This is his characteristic position on Helen throughout. She is not judged because she cannot be judged in the ordinary way. The poem simply shows her doing what she does, with a competence and complexity that belong to someone who has earned both. The Western tradition has not, on the whole, read Homer's women well. Penelope became the archetype of passive faithfulness, the waiting wife, the weaver, the woman whose mind was in service of waiting rather than acting. The poem shows us a woman who is governing a besieged household, managing competing male claims on her resources, running a strategic delay operation for 3 years, and finally deploying the bow contest as the instrument of her husband's return. The tradition saw the loom, Homer saw the strategy. Circe became the dangerous enchantress, the erotic temptation that must be overcome before the hero can continue his journey. In Dante, she is in hell. In later literature, she is the warning about female sexuality and power. Homer writes a woman who gives Odysseus everything he needs to complete the journey, asks for nothing she is not offered, and releases him without reproach. The tradition saw the wand, Homer saw the navigator. Calypso became the possessive goddess, the immortal captor, the trap. Homer writes a woman who loves a man who does not love her in return, who is ordered by Zeus to release him, who argues against the order on grounds of fairness that the poem treats as entirely reasonable, and who complies when she must. She weeps. The tradition saw the imprisonment. Homer saw the love. And these misreadings are not random. They follow a consistent pattern. The female characters are reduced to their function in the hero's story rather than understood as individuals within it. The obstacle, the temptation, the helper, the danger. These are functions, not people, and Homer wrote people. The tradition wrote functions. Emily Wilson's translation, the first complete English Odyssey by a woman, brought this back to the surface most visibly. But the women have always been there in every translation, doing exactly what Homer put them there to do. The tradition has simply been reading past them. Next week, the disguised king arrives home. Everything depends on the woman in the palace having held it together for 20 years. The poem's faith in her is total. As it turns out, so is Homer's. I'll see you next Thursday.